As a family caregiver, you are truly doing the Lord's work taking care of a loved ones. In many ways, you've stopped your whole world, perhaps moved to another city so you can devote all of your resources to caring for a loved one. But what happens when it's over? Hopefully, they've recovered, but possibly they've passed away. Your work as a family caregiver is finished, and you may now feel empty and lost. Well, today, we're going to talk about how to handle this transition. Well, today we are having coffee with Dan Miller. Now, Dan is a New York Times best-selling author of the book, 48 Days to the Work You Love. His podcast, 48 Days to the Work You Love, is highly rated in iTunes as the go-to podcast for advice on work and careers. Dan has a gift for helping people manage the transitions in their life and use them to move to greater heights of success and, more importantly, personal fulfillment. Dan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, John. Looking forward to our conversation.
So, Dan, what I'd like to talk with you about today is people that are in transition. Maybe they've been a family caregiver for an extended period of time, and now that season is over. So, first question I have is, what's the risk if our identity is tied to what we do, even if it's something as noble as caring for a loved one?
Well, yeah, that really raises a larger question than just one application. And a lot of people have done that where they're identified by what they do. We see that, with a high-level CEO or with a business owner or with a banking executive who, through circumstances sometimes not welcome or expected, lose that position and thus, lose their identity. We have to work on establishing a solid identity that goes beyond work. Work is just simply one tool for a successful life. If we're defined only by what it is that we do, then we are indeed very vulnerable.
Yeah. So what are some examples that you've worked through either in your personal life or with folks that you've worked with where they've gone through this transition where they've been a caregiver and now they feel lost? What are some examples and how have you worked with them, or what advice can you give to these folks?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, John, is my dear wife, Joanne, who experienced exactly what you're describing when our youngest child went off to college. Joanne had invested her life into being a mom. She loved the role, loved serving, taking care of our kids. And when the last one went off to college, she went through the same emotions as somebody who just lost their job. She really did. She was like, who am I? What am I supposed to do now? And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I had the privilege of helping her look at herself at that period of time, recognizing her immense skills as a caregiver, which she still has today. But I said, babe, there's a waiting world out there for people who would love to be the recipients of the kind of care and nurture that you provided to our children.
Yeah.
So she found outlets for that. She started volunteering at the Tennessee Prison for Women that we have here in Nashville, Tennessee, about 750 to 800 women there at any given time. A lot of them had never received the loving care of a mom. And she stepped into that role, and wow, she is loved and valued in that environment. But beyond that, she didn't just look for a new place to provide that care. It was also a time of introspection to really take a fresh look at, who am I? What are the gifts that I have? And she did some other exploration, which helped her really birth skills that had been dormant for so many years. Sometimes the role we have does kind of supersede even the exploration or expression of gifts that we have. She also took an art class in that period of time and has become a very accomplished artist to the point that now we have art classes here in our property, and she has the pleasure of teaching others. But that didn't come about until she went through that transition where she didn't have the demands being made on her as a caregiver. So it was released in that transition, that healthy process of taking a fresh look at who am I, what am I doing, where am I going, how am I going to get there?
And I'm gonna guess that this transition didn't occur overnight. There was some space that needed to occur for the transition. How does this help people be better employers or better entrepreneurs or more marketable when they've had these experiences where they've really cared for someone.
The very things that they did in that period of time are valuable assets. We have to erase the idea that the only thing to go on a resume or a curriculum vitae are things that we were paid for. There are many things that can go on there. If somebody has been a dentist, let's step out of this particular application just for a minute, John, but if somebody has been a dentist, it's very easy to think the only thing they could do moving forward is be a dentist. But while they were a dentist and perhaps a dad and husband and son, they were refining other skills as well, where they may have volunteered as a fundraiser at their child's school. They may have coached a soccer team. I mean, those are things that have legitimate place on a resume. So if somebody has been a caregiver, they can list things on there like transportation logistics, where they coordinated all the things that needed to be done, or perhaps the engagement of the person they were caring for in a community and help them find their place in that. So there can be things like customer service, transportation, again, it could be data input, it could be writing blogs during that period of time about that experience. And all those things have a legitimate place in positioning a person if in fact they were authentic skills that they want to continue doing. And we don't want to force things that were forced upon you to be those that you continue repeating if in fact you do want to change. So there's always that opportunity to draw a line in the sand, take a fresh look at who am I, where am I going, how am I going to get there. But if those skills that were utilized in that period of caregiving were in fact things that were fulfilling, gratifying, and implementation of real talents that a person has, they have very legitimate place in being plugged in as part of the next employment opportunity.
I think it's really great that you give people permission to put these non-work related items into their resume, because we have a whole life, and the things that we bring to the next career is a lot more than just what we've done and what we've gotten paid for. So I think it's very important and valuable that you kind of give people permission to use these other opportunities and experiences that they've had.
Well, as a life coach, I've done that a lot over the years and helping people often who feel trapped by virtue of their work experience and academic education. So if somebody is a physician or an attorney or a dentist or a pastor, they often feel trapped by that. Just as if somebody had a season where they were a caregiver, they may feel trapped and identified by that, but they don't need to be. We can take that fresh look and redirect or realign based on what is really authentically true for a person. We all go through seasons of life, and often those, especially the early seasons, are really to help us more clearly identify what it is we don't want to do so that we can allow to come to the surface what we really do want to do. And sometimes these caregiving seasons can act in exactly the same way.
Yeah, yeah. So if someone's going through this and they're ready to make the the transition, what would you tell them? Here are the steps in the process.
First thing to do is to look inwardly. This is like any transition. It's tempting just to see, gee, who's hiring? Where are the best of business opportunities? What are the trends in employment? But those can be Band-Aid solutions and take somebody away from what it is they really have the most value to contribute. So the first thing to do is look inward. I tell people 85% of the process of having a confidence of proper direction at any given time comes from looking inward. So take a fresh look at what are your skills and abilities, not just things you've proven your ability to do, but things you want to continue doing. Number two, what are your personality tendencies? How do you relate to other people? In what environments are you most comfortable? How do you manage, persuade, sell, all those things? That's important to know. So some people are familiar with perhaps using strength finders or the DISC or the Enneagram or Sally Hogshead's new fascination index. I mean, whatever, all of the more of those you have, the better, but to really identify that second piece. And then the third is the one that often we kind of ignore, that being, what are your recurring dreams? What are your values? What are your passions? Sometimes in transition, it's a great time to see an opportunity to implement a passion that you thought, well, that doesn't have any real economic application. Well, perhaps it does. I mean, we have a lady who has done a significant amount of wood carving on our property. Well, sometimes you wouldn't think that that would have any application except as perhaps a fulfilling hobby. Well, it can. And I like to take those things that other people see as unrealistic and see opportunities to actually create an economic model from those.
Yeah. Now we've talked about people that are transitioning as family caregivers, but just sort of thinking a little bit more broadly to the baby boom generation that's getting older. And I know you work with a lot of people and you have a very wide audience. But as you sort of think about some of the challenges that are being faced by baby boomers, either with family caregiving or career transitions, what are some things that keep you up at night? And I can tell you, you can answer that in one of two ways. Either as you think about the baby boomer generation, what gives you so much excitement and so much energy that you can't sleep? And then I don't know if you have a pessimistic bone in your body, but is there anything that sort of, scares you, the coming apocalypse? So you can answer it either or both ways. But as you think about the baby boom generation and as it concerns transitions and careers, what keeps you up at night?
Well, what keeps me up is the excited anticipation of all the new adventures that are still ahead of me. One of the things that we've seen historically is that people think about retirement at about that 60 or 65-year range. Well, that can be frightening because
That's way too young.
if we look at longevity, all of a sudden we've got people who are becoming, centenarians, living to be 100 in more and more numbers. Well, if somebody retires at 65 and they live to be 100, that's 35 years. That's a working lifetime. And we don't want to see that consist of nothing but, sitting on the side of the river, throwing a fishing line out or golfing or sitting in a nursing home, drooling on yourself. I mean, that's not a pretty picture. So I encourage people to look at that next season of life, even if they've gone through a very long, productive career. So if it is at 65 or 70, the question still is, what's the next season of life going to look like for you? I recently went through, as part of a coaching program that I'm involved in, a process called the Life Extender. And it was to decide today, how old are you? And then to identify, how old are you going to be when you die? Well, we all put a number down instantly. And then the question was, all right, now, what do you want to experience in the year before you die, leading up to your death, financially, physically, in terms of relationships, overall wellness? Well, we all wanted to be, have enough money, that we didn't have any worries there. We wanted to have strong relationships. We wanted to be living physically as we were vital and alert. Well, then it kind of begs the question, if you really had all those things in place, how likely is it that you will die? So in looking at it with the new perspective, then how many additional years do you think that you may have because of how well you've taken care of yourself and managed your affairs? And so we extended life. And I know people who expect to live well past 100, which is certainly possible with today's medical technology and the way we know how to take care of ourselves. So I'm always looking at, what's the next season hold? A scary thought for me, if there's something that would keep me awake at night, John, it would be the thought that there's more behind me than there is ahead of me.
Yeah.
That would be a scary thought. If I
Yeah.
ever get to that point, I'm going to be in trouble. Because I think if we get to the point where we think, okay, everything I've done in life has peaked, and from here on, it's just kind of a coasting into the grave. I think if we get there mentally, emotionally, we also tell our body, okay, we're finished. You can start taking back parts because I'm not going to need them anymore.
Yeah.
And we see that. We see people who retire with no plan for what they're going to do, and 2 years later, they're dead. Not because there was a significant physical event that occurred, but because they simply told their body, okay, we're finished. That to me is a scary thought.
Yeah. It really almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways.
Totally.
Well, I appreciate everything that you've done and thank you for coming on the show. And if you want to learn more about Dan and the 48 Days community, you can visit the website at 48days.com or the show notes for this episode at coffeewithjohn.com/203. Now, if you found this episode valuable, please do us a favor and subscribe to Coffee with John in iTunes and leave an honest rating. Well, do you have a topic suggestion or comment about an episode? I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. All of the links are at Coffee with John. That's coffeewithjohn.com.